where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. So, a British lady decides to quit the world of advertising in the year 2000 and she goes backpacking across Asia. Somewhere, somehow in between, she lands up in Mumbai, India, and goes back to the corporate world. In her corporate world is not just the ordinary one, from what I gather. Her corporate world includes the global names like Procter & Gamble, J.W. Thomson, McCann Erickson, and essentially global names in the field of advertising, media, and edtech. Again, somehow, somewhere in between, she meets an Indian man, they get married, they have two sons, cute sons, and now in the year 2022, she goes back to Britain, this time with family. So, what have I missed out? Quite a lot. But one thing I have to mention, what I gathered, her love for Bollywood and her obsession with Shah Rukh Khan. Ladies and gentlemen, young ones, old ones, and the ones who defy age, the wise ones, not so wise, and definitely the curious ones, I am pleased and extremely tickled to introduce Heather Saville Gupta in our podcast series Between the East and the West. And besides many other things, Heather is also a prolific writer and the author of the book Becoming Mrs. Kumar. Welcome, Heather. I am honestly excited to swap experiences and hear more about you. And before we go a little deeper, I have to ask this question. Who are you if I take away all the labels, name? Who is Heather? I have this question. Do indulge me.
Well, first of all, thank you, Minu, for having me. I think the way you've put my story sounds kind of romantic in retrospect and like it kind of was all planned. Actually, it wasn't planned at all, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So who am I? I think that's an interesting question. I think we all have different identities. So I think I'm a working mother, certainly. I'm a global citizen. I kind of land wherever I land and figure out life. But yeah, I would say for me, work and family are two very important pieces of my life, for sure. Two pieces of my life which I try to balance as much as I can, not always terribly successfully.
In one line, how would that be?
In one line, I think passionate about people, wherever they are and whoever they are. So people at work, people in my family, extended family now. Obviously, I have an Indian family, I have a UK family as well. But just having that passion for the people who surround me and also the environments which surround me. So I think that's probably the driving theme, is something around this passion.
Did you finally meet Shah Rukh?
No, I never met Shah Rukh. No, I never managed to make that happen. I met Ritik, I met Aishwarya, I met Priyanka Chopra, but I think my passion for Bollywood fizzled out over some years. I started off very excited about Bollywood, then I realized it kind of felt a bit samey. So I went to lots of premieres and met a few people. I would still love to meet Shah Rukh Khan. That's the only thing I didn't do. But yeah, I did meet quite a few of the Bollywood celebs.
Why did you have this great love for Bollywood?
Well, I don't really anymore, to be very honest with you. I think when I arrived in India, everything in India was so different and new for me. When I discovered Bollywood, I just felt it was very colorful, very vibrant, very exciting, very larger than life. And I just got kind of sucked into that world a little bit. But as I said, over the course of, I think, 6 or 8 years, I kind of fell out of love with it a little bit.
Okay. Just to get to understand who is Heather because from what I see, there were three, of course, very broadly from the outside phases that Heather before she decided to go backpack to Asia. That was still 2000. And then the other phase, backpacking, and then the working. There were many phases. So before we go on, what was your life like a little before 2000, a little about your childhood? Because it'll give us perspective into life after.
So I would say very normal childhood. I think I'm from a small town in the southwest of England, quite remote, quite distant from the capital. Culturally, not very diverse. It's very white kind of community. So I think I grew up craving something a little bit different. I grew up craving diversity and craving the big city and craving excitement. I think it's a pretty typical small town response. And for me, that meant going away as far as I could to university. I went literally the opposite side of the country, from Exeter, where I'm from, which is the southwest, all the way to the northeast, opposite side of the map. And then I lived in London for a while, and then obviously had this desire to go see the world. So I think all of that was driven by having come from a smaller town, which was seemed to be fairly one-dimensional when I was growing up. I mean, it's wonderful to go back there now. I really appreciate it now. But I think growing up, it just felt a little bit too small for me back then.
After having traveled and lived abroad for many years, now when Heather goes back to the small town that she lived in Britain, she appreciates it. This happens oft to people when they want to grow wings and explore the world beyond the parameters of their hometowns. She did just that and has a broader and much richer perspective of life, cultures, places, and much more. And then you were working in some other town?
My first job was in the same city which I graduated in. This was a job with Procter and Gamble in their marketing department. So it was a very big job, very big company. It happened to be in the same city as I graduated. I then moved to London, which was the kind of the most exciting place to be for me at that time within the UK, because it was the capital. So I moved to London, moved into advertising, had a fabulous 5 years in my 25 to 30 years old. It was just, I mean, the most amazing time frame. I was single, I was having fun, I was thoroughly enjoying, I was working crazy hours and just loving the whole experience. So that was the UK part before I decided to leave in 2000.
What prompted you to take that decision?
To leave?
Yeah.
So I hit 30, which looking back now seems incredibly young, but I felt it was not incredibly young. I felt I was kind of old. And I sort of felt like I was having a midlife crisis, maybe a quarter life crisis or something of a crisis. And I just remember feeling that, look, is this all there is?
And that deep feeling of living a one-dimensional life put Heather on a journey of quest. And then the question, is this all there is? Pushed Heather to explore the world beyond the one that she already knew.
You know, I was doing really well at work. I was getting promoted. In fact, I just got a promotion to account director, which was a big one. I was kind of moving my way up. But I saw this very one-dimensional life ahead of me. And I had never traveled before university. And I just felt that, look, I need to go see the world. So I saved up money because I wasn't kind of rich. I had to save and save. I think for 3 years I saved, and then I had this pot of money. And I remember thinking to myself, look, I'm 30, I should probably buy a house because that's what people do, or buy a flat, put down a deposit, buy a flat, do all of that. And the other half of me was saying, forget all of that, let's go traveling. So I was having this conversation with myself. And then I think instinctively I just said, look, I need to get out. I need to go see the world. So that's what happened.
And then why Asia?
Yeah, I went to the travel agent. So this is back in the day when there was no social media, internet was fairly nascent. So we didn't get online and research in those days. We went to travel agents and we went to the library. We did all of those old-fashioned things. So I went to the travel agent and I said, I want to do a round the world trip. So there were these tickets which you paid, I don't know, I think it was £1,000. I mean, very little in those days, but in those days a lot. But you would go right around the world and 10, 12 tickets. So I said, I want to go around the world. He said, okay, where do you want to go? And I said, I'm not sure. So we got this map and we laid it out. And I remember looking at this map of the world and I was like, okay, where am I going to go? And I was like, he said, well, if I were you, I'd either do Asia or I'd focus on South America, but I wouldn't try to do everything. And I said, okay. So then I looked at Asia and I looked at South America. And then I just thought, I don't know, again, instinctively, Asia just seemed to have more countries, more diversity. I could see all these names that were exciting. And I said, okay, let's do it. Let's do Asia. And that was that.
Okay. And in Asia, where did you begin? And destiny intervened once again. Asia it was.
So I began, funnily enough, in Mumbai. I began in India, which was really ironic because I'd never set foot in Asia in my life. My first port of call was the city I ended up living in for 17 years after that. So I landed in what was then, I mean, this is 2000, there was no new airport. It was much more basic. There was, as I said, there was no mobile phones, there was no internet, there was no way of connecting with people. I mean, you really landed and you were on your own. So I landed, just soaked up these sights which I'd never seen or imagined, and smells and craziness of people. And that was my entry into Asia, which was basically a love affair, which has lasted ever since 22 years ago.
So, from your perspective, from a Western perspective, that's very interesting. What was the image of India you had in your mind ever? If somebody had said India, what would pop up? An image or a word which you would equate with at that time? I know it's a long time ago, but
It's a very long time ago, and it's hard to remember back because India's become so familiar to me. But I think I would have probably thought of it as very exotic and very exciting. I certainly didn't have any negative connotations. I didn't know many Indians because I grew up in a very white area of the world. I met non-white folks when I was in London, but I have to say my friendship circles were probably pretty undiverse. So I didn't have Indian friends. But I didn't have any negative associations. I thought, this is exotic, this is exciting, this is spiritual, the same kind of thing that most Westerners think about India, right? They sort of had this view that India is all very spiritual. And I guess that's probably what I thought before I arrived.
okay, now that I can understand. So it equated to exotic and exciting. So exotic, yeah. Till some years ago, some people had this thing of lions roaming roads and elephants. I'm sure you've seen enough of them. In any case, there were time. Right now may be different, but there was a time. I think also even 2000 when you had come in many cities, a Mercedes could line up with a cow and an elephant also at the red light.
Yeah. I mean, you still see some sites which are surprising in that way. So you do see cows on the road, but then you become used to them because they no longer. I mean, I remember when my parents came to visit me in Mumbai, every 5 minutes they'd be talking about the cows on the road, and I was like, but it's so normal to see cows on the road by that point. But when I first arrived, I was also surprised because you didn't see a cow on the road in England. On the highway, I mean, you'd see animals on the highway, and that was all quite surprising. But yeah, I mean, I think people expect elephants and tigers and things, which clearly doesn't happen. And I think those beliefs probably still persist in some parts of the world.
Yes, the land of snake charmers. So, but you said you first landed in Mumbai and then you moved on to, I believe, from India you went to Thailand, or?
Yeah, so my travels, I traveled from India, then I went to Vietnam, then I went to Bangkok and Malaysia and Singapore. I mean, I went everywhere, Indonesia. So I did this full year of backpacking on my own, met people as I traveled. And as I said before, there were no mobile phones, there was no social media, there was no constant pictures, there was no Instagram. We just kind of took pictures in the old fashioned way. And I collected all the rolls of film and I brought them back. And yeah, so that was about a year, and I spent 6 months of that year in Indonesia. I sort of landed in a nice little village in Sumatra, and I ended up digging in there for about 6 months, and sort of becoming part of that community and learn the language and set up a small business there. And it was kind of fun, but it wasn't going to sustain me intellectually or spiritually for too long. So at that point, which was a year later, I was kind of running out of money and thinking, what next? And then very randomly, I got offered a job in Thailand. So then I switched out of the backpacking mode into working mode, which was kind of a overnight switch back into the corporate world.
How did your family feel when you broke the decision to them? Hey, I'm going to backpack across Asia.
As I think has been the case throughout my childhood and my young adulthood, my parents were supportive but never interfering. So I was always very driven, always very ambitious, always wanted to kind of restless, and they just watched and observed and supported, and there was never any criticism or negativity, but they were not surprised. I mean, they were like, yeah, I mean, I think it's what they expected.
Okay, so they sort of expected that. It was not a bombshell, like something dropped onto them out of the blue. So they were like waiting for that spirit to unfold and, oh, this is what. So you were in Thailand for how long then?
So I worked in Thailand for 2 years with a large advertising agency network. I was a regional business head. So actually, that job was really fun because I had responsibility for 12 different countries. So I was based in Bangkok, but I spent the next 2 years traveling for work, but five-star traveling rather than the backpacking I'd done. So I'd seen it all on the ground with my backpack and stayed in all kinds of places. I then did it through a kind of business lens, but each time I would do a business trip, I would then tag a few days on and kind of go underground and rediscover some of my backpacking haunts. So I managed to combine a really nice way of living for those 2 years in Bangkok.
That's nice. It sounds actually nice. This is exactly what you wanted to do, and then you got a job. That's really like destiny playing it out. You are following the call, the calling, so they say, now. And then it sort of calls you. That's what I would like to say. Once you follow that, yeah. And then how did you land up back in Mumbai?
So that was another random. So there's a series of random coincidences. Now, I don't believe anything is ever random because it all kind of happens behind the scenes. And I think somehow you're guided, as long as you're open minded, you end up just sort of going. So what seems like random, actually, there's method to the madness. So I was offered a job in Bombay or Mumbai.
There are no coincidences in life. Heather does not think that, and nor do I. Following the flow, stopping once in a while, and looking within is what Heather was doing and questioning.
So I was working in Bangkok. I was beginning to think, what next? Because being an expat in Thailand was a little challenging because there were lots of families there with kids, which wasn't at that time, wasn't my scene. It was a really fun place to be, but I somehow wasn't feeling a connection to the city or the country as I would have ideally liked living out of a suitcase. So I was thinking kind of what next? And then this job popped up and they offered me this job. It was another advertising agency, but with the same client. So I became another regional business head for the same client, different brands, different country, different agencies. So there was some familiarity. So interestingly enough, I didn't travel to Mumbai to check out the place, check out the company. I did a couple of phone interviews because this was before video calling. And I said, okay, let's do it. Packed up my bags, moved to Mumbai and just kind of landed. So this was about, I think, 3 years after I originally had landed for my first stint in Asia. So I had some residual memory of India. I'd also been working with Indians because in my time in Bangkok, one of my markets that I was running was India as well as Pakistan. So I had some South Asia familiarity. So yeah, I picked up my bags and arrived in Mumbai.
Okay, so that sort of now makes sense. It's a part of a journey. Okay. How and when did you meet Vivek, your husband?
So that was about 3.5 years later. So I was on my own for the first 3.5 years, surviving and thriving. I had the support of my company, so it wasn't like I was completely alone. I had a company apartment, they gave me a driver, I had a little car, I used to go around, but I was, living alone. And then 3.5 years in, again, I started to think, okay, what next? Because there's this restlessness that keeps coming, right? And I was thinking, okay, maybe it's time to think about the next move. And exactly at that point where I began to think, what next? I met my husband. It was fate, chance, call it whatever, destiny. I don't know, what do you want to call it? But yeah, we met initially as friends and then it turned into something else.
So this is exciting. Please help us. Please help the romantic ones. Indulge us. How did you meet him? Where did you meet him?
So I actually met him through a website. So this is before Facebook, right? There was no social media at all. This was 2007. So just as social media had launched, so it wasn't popular. So there was a website called Couchsurfing back in the day. And the whole premise was that if you had a room in your flat or house or apartment or whatever, you could advertise it on this site and people would come and surf your couch. So I had all kinds of people staying with me from all different nationalities. They'd be visiting Mumbai they'd come in. There was some protection. They would have your passport. The website itself was quite solid, but it was a really nice way to meet people. So I had my profile there, and people would come and stay with me, and I take them out and show them Mumbai. So anyway, this chap popped up called Vivek, and he said, "Can I come surf your couch?" And I actually had friends staying at that time, so I said, "I'm really sorry, but it's not free, and my room isn't free." So he said, "No problem," and we connected. There was some option to make a connection, like Facebook now. He then left India as well, and then he came back 6 months later and said, "Hey, can I surf your couch?" And I was like, not sure. For some reason, I said no, but he was quite persistent. He said, "Okay, let's meet for dinner." And I said, "Okay, we'll meet for dinner." Anyway, long story short, we met for dinner, and nothing happened for about a month. We actually became friends. We started hanging out. I was telling him, "Look, I think I'm going to leave India, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do." And he said, "Yeah, that's a good idea." And then suddenly, one night, I think things just changed, and the rest is history.
But then when you were living in Mumbai, so I guess that must have been after 2003. You traveled through Asia, you were looking after countries. How was it like? I know there are huge contrasts. We're talking of it is East and the West. So how did it hit you in terms of people traveling, food? Because I believe it must have been a very intense experience. There's another thing which I have understood is traveling is different from living. So okay, you are backpacking because you were in that mental frame also. This too shall pass. I'm here and I'm going to go away. I don't belong here. I'm just coming here to visit. So I'm observing and it's different. No, nothing will irritate you, hopefully. And then when you start living in a place, you buy stuff. There's some things which belong to you. There's some of you which belongs to them somehow. Or I don't know. What was your experience? Again, traveling is different from living.
So I think for me, it's always about the lens you use to view a place. The choice, you have a choice to see a place in a certain way. So you can see India in two different ways, right? You can see it, you can see the dirt, you can see the chaos, you can see the crowding, you can see the staring, you can see the heat, you can see the lack of hygiene. That's one way you can see it. Or the other way you can see it, which is the way I always saw it, was it's in chaos lies opportunity. The jugaad, the ability to kind of adjust and get things done, the excitement, the color, the richness of the culture. So I always saw it with a very positive lens, despite the challenges. And I think that instinctive positive lens, which I brought onto my surroundings, it's just who I am. So I have that ability to be positive about everything. It made it an adventure, even when I was living there. So, of course, I mean, it's not that it was all every day I'd be sort of dancing and singing and happy. I mean, there were days when, it did become overwhelming and it was really tough. And sometimes I would banging my head against the wall, trying to get the simplest of things done, like open a bank account or just find someone who could come and help with my house, who I could communicate with or figure out how to make certain payments, particularly before everything became online. I mean, now it's 1,000 times easier for people, I think, living in India particularly, and missing certain things about home. But despite all of that, I felt very energized by, and I still do, even after 20 years, I feel very energized by Asia and by India in particular.
So, in one word, exciting. There's a lot changing constantly. Each time I travel back, there's something new which has happened. There's a new construction. This is something interesting. The other day, I met a German who settled in Thailand, and we met in a strange place, the hospital here in Germany. And he mentioned something interesting. He said, "You go back to the city in Europe. On an average, it doesn't have to be every city. So you come back after 5 years. You will still find the same building in the same place. It's not suddenly that a road has sprung out of somewhere, it's sprouted out. You go back to places in Asia, like countries like India and other places. Each time, there's something new which has sprung up. It's dynamic, it's constantly changing and moving. It's not the same. You don't get the feeling of sameness all the time. Is that what you also felt?
Yeah, in fact, I remember I would come back to the UK for 3 weeks and I would return to my neighborhood, and then I would have been away for 3 weeks and suddenly there would be a new bar, there'd be a new shop, there'd be a new building sometimes. And I remember thinking, wow, and this is just 3 weeks. Imagine how much change happens, in a year or in 2 years or in 5 years. So the city is dramatically changing. And I think that also is quite refreshing, but that also can be quite exhausting because everything around you keeps changing and shifting. So I think that there is a happy midpoint. perhaps India and Mumbai moves a little too quickly, and perhaps the West moves a little too slowly, and there's some nice midpoint in between. But generally, I'm a person that thrives on change, so I do like that sense of movement for sure.
I'm curious. When you were living in India, now, okay, you're working, you've met Vivek, your life is expanding in a certain way. When you come back to Britain to visit, like you said, for a few weeks, what was the feeling like? Is it like I'm coming back home, or it's like I'm visiting? So, what was the feeling like? Or when you hit back India again after the visit, what was that feeling like?
I think it was always like I have many homes. So there would be a sense of familiarity. The minute I got off the plane in Heathrow, London, I would walk to the passport and I would feel that familiarity and I'd go into the newsagent and I'd pick up whatever I picked up for the journey and it would be like hugely familiar. But then when I came back to Mumbai 3 weeks later, the smell of the city, I mean, you land and you get that smell and you're like, okay, now this is also very familiar. So I think both were equally familiar and both were equally exciting at the same time. Again, just different perspectives and different lenses because I missed things about each country and I also enjoyed things about each country. So whichever one I went to, there was an opportunity to kind of enjoy something a little bit different from the other place.
So you didn't have that I belong to this place. You know, you breathe when you come hit the airport and like, oh, I'm so glad. Okay, it's coming home. You didn't have that kind of. So you're actually a global citizen. There's no other word.
Yeah, I didn't have any difference of feeling. I think the only difference of feeling is when I walked into my own apartment, which happened to be in Mumbai, and I walked into my own bedroom and I kind of like sat on my own bed and I was like, okay, I feel at home now because it's this is the comfort of my of the place which I own or the place which I have chosen to put my things and surround myself with. But that could have been anywhere. I mean, it could have equally been London.
So essentially, your space that you've created, your own space you've created, your things you associate with. Heather thrives on change and treats life as an adventure. She has feelings of familiarity and a sense of home in both continents. And now, what about romance and the wedding?
Well, my family, Indian family, are Christian. So that made it a little bit easier because there wasn't a Hindu ceremony required. So it was obvious we would marry in the Christian tradition in some way. So that was the church service kind of sorted, and that was very easy because there was alignment. And then I don't think you can get married in India at all without having that big fat Indian wedding of some kind in the evening. And of course, we had the mendi, we had the haldi, we had all of those ceremonies, but we also had a rehearsal dinner, which is quite Western, and we had hen and stag nights, which are also quite Western. So we kind of mixed it all up.
So your family, you are Gupta as the other name sounds, right? Heather Saville Gupta.
Yeah.
So they are but Christians. That's interesting. So you decided to take the name Gupta. You added it to your surname. So Saville is your maiden name, right?
Is my middle name. Yeah, so I was very excited to take an Indian name. In fact, I know people who've married Indians and have chosen not to take the name, keep their own name. I also felt it was important to keep my own name as well. So then I just did both. So I just added. I mean, I don't use my full name always. Sometimes it's just Heather Gupta. I'm comfortable with both, but just to have that in my passport and on my kind of name, I just thought it was just really important to have that name.
Ah, interesting. So I had this thing that I told my husband, okay, if you add my name also to yours, then I'll be happy. Then both have the same lineage, okay, and then so on. So I'm very curious because there's a whole chapter in my book about the naming. So your children, how the names happen to be, the first and the second names.
So the first names are Western names because they have Indian surnames. So my husband and I were aligned on that. The names are Jake and Noah, which are just Western names. So yeah, so they have one name of each because they are half British and half Indian. So we both wanted them to have like one foot in each camp.
That's nice. Good alignment and an agreement to come to. So there was no astrology and so on. All that was not involved either in the setting up of the. Yeah, because yes, they were. Yes. Christians already. Okay. So in our thing, there was this thing I wanted astrology, and the date had to be set, and the child didn't have a name till he was born.
And we didn't do any of that. We had the names, we had, I mean, everything was there.
And tell us about Becoming Mrs. Kumar, the book.
It was on my bucket list to write a book forever. And I met a publisher and they said, okay, fine, we'll publish it. It's actually not technically an autobiography, but everyone assumes it is, but it's not. It's fiction, but obviously based on my experiences. It's a made up person with made up experiences. It just parallels my journey, obviously, but people read it and say, "Oh, you did this and this and this," and I'm like, "It's not me." I mean, it's a made up fictional character. So I wrote the book again purely for fun. I did it in 2012. Wrote it between work, between having babies, and yeah, that was that.
That's interesting. So this was based on your experiences in Asia, right?
So it's the story of a British girl who moves to India and then she meets her Mr. Right and she has all the adventures. So I mean, I based it on my experiences because that was my reference point. But she's a different person to me, you know, similar but different, and she goes on a slightly different journey with a slightly different man from a slightly different place. So yeah, there are familiarities in themes, but it is not me.
And how did your family take your meeting an Indian person and getting married? What was your family's first reaction, the first one?
So I think the first reaction was relief that I finally found somebody. I mean, they weren't particularly bothered about getting me married off. I mean, I come from a pretty progressive background, and in fact, I didn't think I'd ever get married, and they didn't think I'd ever get married because I'd stated clearly that that was not my intention in life, either to get married or have children. So I think their first reaction when I said I was going to get married was complete surprise and disbelief that I, of all people, had decided to get married because it was something I told them I wasn't going to do.
In your relationship is because at the end of the day you are still British. I mean, at least you're British origin, right? So I believe in that definition of culture where your personality, environment, education, surroundings all come together to make your individual culture. So it and a bit of the country. So it's all a mass. No? It's kaleidoscope is just not one thing in your coming together in a relationship, your Britishness, if I may use the word, and his Indianness, do you guys clash?
I think there was a lot of adjustment required. We had to adjust. So I think there was obviously an attraction. There was obviously a coming together. I mean, he said, I want kids. I said, I don't. We worked our way through then that. I said, okay, fine. Then let's see and see if it happens. So we aligned on most things, but then there were some things which we would clash on. For example, his family, after we got married, his family, I wouldn't say they put pressure, but they kept asking for good news, which we all know what good news means in India. And I found this quite intrusive, and I didn't react very well to it. And then there was a complete misunderstanding because I found it very intrusive. They were just showing that they cared and they were concerned about the next step. So that was a little bit difficult. Things like food, you know, I'm not a big eater and I don't put a lot of store on food and eating, and I just eat whatever is there. And of course, in India, eating is life, right? So having to eat more than I would normally eat and keep going back for more and more and put food at the center of kind of some of the family events, I had to adjust quite a lot to that as well. So various things, various adjustments. But I think from a values perspective, my husband and I were on the same page, because if you're not aligned, so the way we would bring up our kids, the kind of the way, the values we would teach them, the way we would want to live as a family, these things were aligned. If they weren't, I think it would have been very difficult for us to have made it work. And I've seen other couples, unfortunately, kind of not survive through cross-cultural relationships because they haven't had the depth of that foundation aligned. So that becomes impossible actually to kind of move ahead.
I totally agree with you. It's the center, the value systems and the beliefs which need to be aligned, and the rest is an envelope. So the rest also depends upon the openness of the people involved, how much one is able to expand, decrease the envelope, and come together. So I think that part is also not only cross cultural, of course, makes it bigger to arrive to figure out the center because there's so much of the envelope you have to go through. But even in the same culture, I would have seen also in India, which you've now been there, in Europe and in India, they may be of the same culture, but that central alignment may still not be there. The envelopes may be similar, but the alignment and the values, so it can happen in India or in Europe. So I totally agree with you. Very nice, actually, is to see that you guys made it through the envelopes to the center. Very, very happy to see that.
It wasn't easy. There were times when I think both of us were like, this is too hard. In the early days, when you're compromising, you're adjusting. I think once you figure your way through the early stages, and then of course having children, I think really cements it. And you can't just walk out of something where you've had children. You have to kind of work it through and work it out. Honestly, it's not easy being in a relationship, full stop. It is far easier in life to be single, right? And do your own thing and answer to yourself. But it's much less fulfilling, obviously, for many people. I mean, some people love being single and that works for them, and that's great.
Heather honestly speaks of challenges in an intercultural relationship, because when one marries a person, you're not just getting married to an individual, you are coming in close contact with their family and country cultures in many ways, and yet the learnings and the joys of overcoming these challenges and reaping the benefits of unity in thought and values is what she finds extremely enriching. For a person who did not plan motherhood at all, she finds it deeply fulfilling, and I'm really glad to hear that.
But I think, for me, I realized that despite saying I didn't want to get married and have children, maybe deep down I really did, and I was perhaps not being truthful with myself either. So when that happened and when the kids happened, I think, I did connect very deeply with that development in my life.
I share the same feelings and experience. One has left a fulfilled life, and this is another phase in life, and it is extremely becoming a mother, particularly, I found as the most fulfilling experience. You become whole in a way that is not explainable.
Yeah, no, you can't explain it. It's impossible. So you either experience it or you don't experience it. And if you don't experience it, then you don't know, and that's also fine, right? I mean, if I hadn't met my husband and I hadn't had children, I would have been very happy with my life. I know that because that's the kind of person I am. But I would have probably looked at people with kids and said, "Oh, look what I've escaped all these years." Now I see another side because I have my own children. I'm like, wow, look what I would have missed. But I wouldn't have known that, right? So if I hadn't known it, then it wouldn't have affected me. So it would have been good either way.
Totally, I'm totally with you. I would have also, because I think you also had children. I think after the age of 40, right? So I had similar. In fact, that I can share with you. I remember there was a doctor in Germany. Okay, I went there. Thought, okay, I want to have a child. So let me see if all is well. No, in that kingdom, I went there, and he looked at me, and in Germany, in Hamburg, and asked me this peculiar question, which is important for this episode between the East and the West. He asked me this very peculiar question: do women in India give birth so late in life? And I was staring at him. What is that got to? This is my wish. I mean, so that was the limited concept that was. And well, in India is also normal, like in other places. Late, early, all types happen. It's, I think, fairly similar to different parts of the world, unlike what other people might think. So, what was motherhood like? Parenting, also, again, very important because it's cross cultural. I've realized that an individual's upbringing has the maximum impact. You realize it when you have your own children. This is what I realized. So, and having different places and different values of at least bringing up. What was that like when you guys, you and Vivek are bringing up?
So I think it's very interesting because obviously the children themselves, I had two boys, they themselves are very different from each other. Personality wise, they are opposite characters, these two boys. Secondly, they have two sides of their culture, right? So they were born in India, they were brought up in India, but they travel back very often. So seeing how they're embracing different parts of their culture, and I see them observing a lot. So they will say, this is done like this here and they don't do it like that there, and figuring out how they should behave. So we've just moved back to London. So things like using a knife and fork, right? My 12-year-old will eat everything with his hands. And I'm like, use your knife and fork. And he's like, but I'm Indian. And I'm like, okay, fair point. So how do I, how do I tell him that, that's fine. But if you do that with your friends here, they might sort of find that a bit different, right? So just be mindful. I mean, you can do it either way because you are mixed kids, right? So do it either way, but just be mindful of, whether you want to, what you want to embrace and what you choose not to embrace, and just seeing them figuring it out. And of course, now they're a little older, they start pushing back and questioning. So when they were little, when they were like 2, 3, 4, 5, they just do what they're told, right? Because that you are really taking care of them in all aspects. They don't start to form their own opinions. But the minute they start to challenge and have their own opinions, my son will say, but why are you asking me to do it like this? In India, they do it like that. And I'm half Indian, therefore. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So he's actually challenging me and pushing back my assumptions sometimes.
And that's interesting. So there is a journey, another individual had pointed out. Then you are raising a third culture kid, for example. That's exactly what my son would also be, and your children are third culture. So they grew up observing and absorbing, and aware person would say, okay, you decide this is what it is there, and this is what it is here, and you find your levels. You don't have to do it this way or that way. You choose. So yeah, it's an amalgamation. Sometimes easy and sometimes not so easy. That was. Tell me. Well, I'm very curious about one or two aspects or more of the parenting, because we went through that, and I've devoted a whole chapter also in my book, the same name. This was about putting the children to sleep. So when your kids, you're already smiling. So when your kids were small, like small, 1 year or less in more, were they put in a separate room or they were with you? It's a very important aspect, actually, of differences in parenting in both countries, in both continents.
So actually, they had their own room, but they would mostly sleep with us because they liked it and we liked it. But they would sleep when they were told to sleep. And that's quite an important distinction, because I saw and observed a lot of my Indian friends who would be more flexible with their kids' bedtime, for example. So the kid would dictate the timing, and they would come to me and say, how do you make your kids sleep? And I would say, well, I put them in bed and I put the light off and they sleep. But mine won't sleep. Why do yours sleep and why do mine not sleep? So I said, but they don't have a choice, right? They're told to sleep. And I could never understand why it was so challenging to get them to sleep. So yes, we did co-share quite a lot. And even now, even though my sons are older, my older one who's 12, he just turned 12, he still loves to sleep with me. And I keep telling him now, look, we're in the UK, you're getting older, you're going to, you're almost a teenager next year, you're going to have to rethink this. And he's like, no, but I still love sleeping with you. So that's also something which is really nice, because, there will be a time very soon where he starts to say, no, I really want my own space, and I'll miss that. So I'm kind of hanging on to that as well. But he has the opportunity. I mean, they have their own rooms. They've always had their own rooms. But I think the sleeping piece and the discipline around that is a big difference that I've seen in our approach versus some of my Indian friends' approach.
Okay, so a perspective. It's the discipline part, at least because I was brought up in India. So for us, sleep time was also like exact. Lights off, you're in bed. So there we were brought up in a very British way in terms of discipline and timing. But what I see is different here in Germany was the fact we also had a different room for our son, but he was sleeping with us. And that was something which was very difficult to put through in the relationship, because how it is done in Germany is now they have to be in many a lot of homes. I would not say for everybody, I'm saying a lot of homes. You have the child, how small or whatever, has to be in a separate bed and in that room, in the other room. Now, I read a lot about this. I went through researches and books and so on. I can share that with you. And they said the new cortex is not developed. So it's like actually complete stress for a child who doesn't have that system developed. The child needs to be cared for. And while here it was something else. And I remember buying also a separate bed just so that when the in laws came home, they would see a separate bed in the other place. And okay, so there would be no questions. But I remember our whole story only came to rest. We used to have this constant discussion. There is a method called cry to sleep. So it's called cry to sleep. And there are experts who actually vouch for it. No, this is the right way. And we between us had a huge tussle till we reached once went to India, and I introduced my erstwhile pediatrician, who was my doctor when I was young, and she met my husband, and then she said exactly what you just said. At some point, you are going to be the losers because you are going to miss it. You will feel like that, and by that the child will want his own space and room and so on. And trust me, that 15-minute conversation, after that we've never had a discussion ever. So the child has his room, he goes back there, but it's understood the child's upper brain needs to be, the neocortex is not developed. It's in the developing stage. It will happen when it has to happen, and we'll be the ones who will miss it. So this is an example of huge contrast about. Then it comes to the value system. No, it becomes part of it, and it can make parenting difficult across cultures. It's not an issue which comes up once in several months. It would be an everyday issue. So I'm glad you guys found your thing and we guys found it. So, what was your working? Because working is where you are spending maximum hours a day. So, how was that like between Britain and India?
So again, very interesting because I just came back to London. So I'm observing the world of work in the West firsthand for the first time in 2 decades. I've never worked so I ended up in HR from advertising. I moved into human resources, heading HR functions in India for about 5 or 6 different companies. But I've never worked in HR in the UK. So I'm in a new industry for the UK, and I'm back here. And really interesting to see the difference. I think I became so Indian in my style of working. So things like work-life balance, I genuinely don't get an email after 6 p.m. ever, unless it's an emergency, which it never is. I don't get calls or emails at the weekend in the UK. And that was something which was very different from India. It's nonstop, right? There's constant calls. WhatsApp. We don't use WhatsApp for work, right? It's a very personal tool in the UK. So my WhatsApp is never there, never pinging. When I wake up in the morning, all my WhatsApp is from India, from various people and connections and sources and former clients and coaching clients and God knows what, right? So there's a very different, and I'd say healthy respect here for work-life balance, for personal life. There's a politeness, there's a space that people give you. There's a different kind of energy. What India has work-wise is, I mean, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of things that happen. There's also a lot of chaos. There's also a lot of agility. I would say in India, things happen quickly, and I think that can be a good thing if it happens quickly, but not in too overwhelming a way, because people in India find solutions for things really fast, which if you're managing a team in particular, that can be very energizing because you're like, okay, we figured it out. That's great. Whereas in the UK, I think things get stuck a little longer and then you have to sort of push them, and you're trying not to be too pushy because that's also not culturally acceptable. So I think there are very stark differences, but I think I would say overall that there's more respect here for people and for time.
If we have to put it, there would be Indians are more flexible in their attitude, and here the attitudes in terms of working we are talking, the attitude would be more fixed.
Yeah, there is more fixed. There's fixed timing. There's fixed hours. There's not just fixed hours and timing, but also a kind of, say in India, if you look at a problem, you will find a solution, right? Because you have to. I think in the UK, you rely on other people to sometimes bring you a solution, right? The state or the system or whatever kind of you're in will kind of find the solution. Whereas in India, that's not there. So if you have a broken pipe in your house, you got to fix that thing. Or if you have a problem at work, you've got to get in there and figure it out and fix it, rather than something coming in and sort of taking responsibility for that. So it's a very jugaad sort of like, we'll adjust, we'll figure it out, we'll make things happen, we'll fix it. But those fixes in India can be a bit sloppy and a bit short term sometimes. You end up with a bigger problem on your hands. So there are pros and cons to both, right? On the one side, you have that agility and that flexibility, and then let's just do it, let's just fix it, let's move fast. But that can also then create more problems because you put a sticking plaster over things and then it gets worse. Or you have the other way, which is like, let's all do it slowly, let's align everything, let's do it properly, let's kind of do it by the book. But that can take longer, and that can mean that people get a little paralyzed by inertia. So the trick is to find the middle ground between those two.
So essentially, also there's a, you rightly said, and very interesting, is that probably that self-reliance there comes, and the agility comes from not complete reliance on the system or the government or whatever's around you. So you try to fix it because it's quicker and it's faster, and you don't know whether it'll be done otherwise. So probably, yes, I get it. And how was then, well, because now you've had the very interesting experiences of working in offices pre-COVID. So that was, of course, very nice, I gather, in a working environment. And yes, I totally understand the differentiation in the private space. There is more respect for privacy in Europe than in countries in Asia. I'm talking of India at least. There, yes, people will not ask you here probing questions, while in India, yes, if you are whatever, 30 people will ask you, okay, what are your plans for marriage? Or, as you said, the good news. So it'll be asked for. So, yes, encroachment into that space. The personal space is very clearly defined sphere in many countries in Europe. But when you are there in the office, what was that like? Were you also in the HR function, really the people space, the hotbed of it all? So, what was that experience vis a vis your own thoughts, expectations?
So my current office in London is really quiet. So I was struck by how quiet it was because I'm not used to that, right? And there's more space. So there are health and safety regulations about how much space every person has to have in the office. The desks seem to be enormous to me. When we're having discussions now about scaling up, and I'm like, oh, we can fit more people in, don't worry. And they're like, no, we can't because health and safety and so on. I'm like, oh, okay, okay. And I'm used to more noise. I think more people in smaller spaces and always sort of jamming in people and trying to just adjust again. And I think that doesn't fly here. Everything is kind of better planned. And then it's funny because in my London office at 5 o'clock, pretty much every day, you'll start to hear these noise levels from outside. And that's everybody going to the pub at 5 o'clock from the office, which is a very British thing to do. You finish work, and this is, I mean, working in the city of London, right? So it's the financial center. Everyone goes and has a drink after work, and it can be any day of the week. And then suddenly the noise levels rise outside, which is something which doesn't happen in India, right? Everyone finishes work late and then goes home in India. So that's quite different and quite interesting.
But there would be more noise level otherwise, minus the pub part, which I understand in India, or general noise level.
No, India's just noise everywhere. So there's honking. So you have the noise outside, you have the noise inside. I mean, everywhere's kind of noisy, right? So to even have a discussion or a meeting, you have to take yourself away and find some private place to talk to somebody. Whereas that doesn't happen in London because people are just constantly on calls, but at their desks because they have these giant desks, and everyone's, the noise levels are lower. So you can talk to somebody like you and I could have a conversation now in the office, and that would be fine because there's not this huge hubbub of noise all around us because people are generally, I think, just quieter, and there's more space for people to kind of be absorbed by the, the space around them.
Could that also be city difference? Because in India, there are also cultural differences in different cities. And Mumbai is a place, is extremely, they say it's a city which never sleeps. So it is constantly on the move and dynamic. And because that noise thing, I didn't have, at least in the office thing and the personal sphere, I didn't have in Delhi, for example.
Oh, I found it similar in Delhi. I mean, I've worked out of Delhi, I've worked out of Bangalore, I've worked out of Calcutta.
Yeah. In India, it's constantly on the move. There's like no sleep there, from what I understand from a few friends who work in that sector. I think the normal hours are 9 or 10 or whatever of going back home. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the average time to leave the office would be definitely after 8. So 8 or 9 or 10, and for various reasons, right? Because I mean, I spent 15 years trying to figure this out because I wanted everyone to leave the office and kind of get home and have time with their families. But then people live in with their parents, right? Most people in London are not living with their parents, or that is changing a little bit, but and they have their own rooms if they're at home, whereas in India, everyone kind of lives together in one space. So it's almost better to be in the office to have that privacy, and you have the air conditioning, and you have food in the evening, and you're surrounded by young folks. And so people would resist leaving the office, but then they would also start very late. So people would come to the office. If I could get them there for 10, it was like a miracle. I mean, it would be like 11 and onwards. So they'd come in by 11 and then they would work all the way through till that late. So very different kind of timing at the top and tail of the day. Whereas in London, I mean, people get to the office by 8, 8:30, and they're out of the door by 6, 5, 6. So it's a very different kind of construct because we have to get home and feed our families. We don't have help, right? There's in London, there's no maids, there's no drivers, there's no helpers unless you're extremely privileged. So everyone has to do it themselves. So you cannot work until 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 because then who's going to feed your family?
And how are you adjusting to that? You got my next point. How are you adjusting to that? Because after getting used to paid help in India, which is such a blessing, because then thankfully they take care of many things which can take up your time and energy. So it's a really good support system. How are you managing that back to London?
So I think that's probably my biggest challenge. So I have had help for the last 20 years, much to the amusement of my British friends who think I'm terribly spoiled. But my point is, well, look, if I can outsource this stuff and give somebody an income and make them part of my family, then why not, right? It's win-win. I think the most challenging thing about not having the help is just juggling everything. So today my two boys started school. They're in different schools with different timings, and I'm working, and my husband is here right now, but he will also be working. He also has to travel back to India for some time. So how am I physically going to be in one or two different places at one time? I'm so used to having someone pick up and drop the kids from school, or even to the school bus, as it were. So having to be very organized about getting up, getting the kids ready, getting one to one school, getting one to the other school, getting myself to the office, getting them picked up, getting one picked up, getting two picked up, bringing them back, feeding them and doing all of that. So it is a little bit challenging. But again, because the UK is more respectful of time, and I've also had the conversation with my boss to say, look, I might need a little bit of flexibility as we settle in. And he's very, very supportive. And he's like, just deliver results and we're all good. I think there is that support here. Whereas I think in India, if you leave the office, I mean, I used to leave at 5. I used to get in the office at 8 in the morning in Mumbai and leave at 5. And even though I'd started at 8 and worked till 5, there would be this general like disapproval when I walked out at 5 because it was just not done. Whereas here, it's very normal, right? If I need to go pick up my kid from school, it's a very normal thing because nobody has the help to be able to, enable them to just pick up the phone and say, go get the kids, because we have to do it ourselves. But it is a little bit tough. Things like cleaning and cooking, again, I mean, I don't mind doing any of these things. In fact, it's quite nice to actually cook for the family, which I haven't done for a really long time, apart from dabble a little bit. So yeah, again, it's just being organized. Got to get the shopping, got to make sure I've got, because it's not like Bombay where you call up and you're like, please deliver this and please deliver that, and it just comes to your door. It doesn't work like that in England. You can't just call up and get something delivered. It doesn't work. So you have to go and physically bring it. So then it's like, oh no, I've run out of milk. Oh no, I've run out of bread. Oh no, I'll have to go to the shop. Oh no, the shop's closed. What do we do? And just, it's a very different kind of construct. So just being super organized is required.
Yeah, one has to be really to the minute organized. And yes, in the beginning, it had hit me like a hardship. Okay, what is this? Before I kicked myself, it's okay, different phase in life. Let's enjoy this journey as well. But yes, it is a challenge when you've had that and then, so it change. I'm totally with you there. Probably didn't cook till I came here. Didn't know how to make stuff beyond a cup of tea. And how was traveling like? Traveling in general within the city and between cities, and when you're on the move, what was that experience? The experience of it, because as even when I adjusted to the traveling from there to here, it was different. When the expectation here was, I come from a country of 1.3 billion people, so I should be used to people, period, people. So when I landed up one day at the Hauptbahnhof, the main station, my husband wanted to show me how the metro works. I stood there like a lost dog and I looked around. My husband had the most incredulous expression on his face when I said, there are too many people. And he looks at me and he says, you come from a country of 1.3 billion people. And then it was 1.2 then, at least 10 years back. And I stared at him and said, okay, but they don't live with me. So they are there out there somewhere and on the television screen. They don't live next to me and around me. So I remember that. So how was that, the thing between just generally the feeling, the experience of it in Britain and in India?
So I think the biggest difference is obviously looking different. And in India, I would always be different and always be stared at. And I just got used to that. I didn't notice it after a while, but everybody would be staring and people would come and people would talk and people would come. One person came and sat beside me in a mall and asked me how much money I was making every month. And I was like, okay, this is, I'm not going to tell you that. This is very weird, but that's India, right? People will ask you these kind of questions and, oh, where are you from? Constantly, 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 like asking all these questions. And I just got used to that. And then moving around the city, I mean, was lucky enough to have a car and a driver, which was amazing. So being taken from place to place, which was very privileged, and that cocooned me to an extent. But then spending an hour and a half or 2 hours each way to the office in this kind of giant car, with you were thinking about the pollution, you were thinking about the effect of the environment, and it was such a waste, and all of that was happening. But it was very challenging to use public transport because, I mean, the trains are downright dangerous, and I refused to travel on them because they didn't have doors and I just wouldn't do it. And then there was no other way to really reach the office. So that was it, really. So yeah, whereas the UK, nobody looks, nobody stares. I'm just the same as everybody else. And then I get on this fantastic public transport system every day, which takes me from my home to the office quickly. And it's not terribly cheap, but it's very convenient. And, you know, I travel now by public transport very happily. I don't even own a car in London because I don't need one. And that also feels a little bit more environmentally responsible as well.
Yeah, they're different sides. And yes, you use the right word actually. One is cocooned. So what I also discovered when I came here and then I thought back and I reflected that we all, our lives are like islands. And we become in one space morning till evening and a life is like this and like clockwork things are working. And then you're suddenly thrown out of that into another or you've plunged into it voluntarily, whichever way. So, but then it's really something else. But there's something which you hit on, which was also something which I wanted to ask you. What, being a woman, how was it like? How did you feel? Did you feel safe in India?
Always. Except that's not entirely true. In Mumbai, I felt very, very safe. The only place I didn't feel very safe was Delhi. I hate to stereotype, but when I would arrive in Delhi, I'd go there very often. I would not feel very comfortable somehow. I used to do a lot of business in Gurgaon, so I would travel through these streets, and somehow, whether it was in my own head or whether it was because people told me, but there was something in the air that never made me feel terribly safe. So I would kind of take care. But in Mumbai, I would frequently walk home like late at night through the streets. I just wouldn't even worry about it because it had very, very, very safe feeling. So Mumbai, I never had a problem.
Delhi is there are also now also many other places are considered many other places are also considered unsafe for women, and that was a question wanted to of course ask because yes, I remember I used to walk in Lodi Garden, and I used to use a stun gun, and at some point I had a bodyguard, and then later I developed a cachet of walkers who would walk with me. So that I would not be jumped at. So, yes, women do not feel safe there. And because they don't feel safe, their family also is always on edge till the woman is home. So, therefore, there are more rules like, okay, late out, you have to be with somebody. And that is the unfortunate part. There are, of course, amazing aspects also, like in any other country, the amazing and the incredible versus the decrepit part. So, yep, that is true. And when you think of diversity, the diversity in your definition, how would you define diversity? Before I ask you, how did you feel about diversity in India and in Britain?
So I think for me, diversity is just about seeing beyond the superficial. So seeing beyond the color, seeing beyond the ethnicity, the style, the gender, the preferences, just or not saying that stuff and going deeper and sort of getting to the core of a person. That to me is diversity, because all the other stuff is superficial and actually shouldn't matter. But it does, unfortunately. We are very judgmental as human beings, but it really shouldn't matter.
And how was the difference between India? How is diversity treated in India as what you've now experienced both countries? So how is it different, the subject of diversity in both countries?
India is, unfortunately, I would say, far less progressive in many ways. Although, I mean, it's ironic because Indians are not generally white people, but India is a very racist country against, I mean, skin color is a hugely sensitive issue. And I've had to deal with a lot of racism in the office, and just sort of educate people around racism, because there's a lot of judgment about the darkness of one's skin, which can be very debilitating for a lot of people in India. Gender equality, age. I think India is generally a more ageist country. So once you're, I mean, in your 40s, it kind of becomes a little harder to get work, particularly if you're a woman, because there's also a very young population. And I think other areas of diversity like gender fluidity, lesbian, gay, transsexual rights, not really very progressive. I mean, a lot has happened in the past 10 years, I think, to educate people, and there is movement in the metros, in the cities, but it tends to be a harder struggle, whereas I think the UK is a little bit more primed to come from a place of at least outwardly embracing diversity. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done in companies to make people more mindful of the need to kind of embrace diversity. And of course, I being kind of non-Indian but having white skin, I mean, people would put me onto a pedestal for that reason, which wasn't acceptable for me at all, because it was deeply unpleasant. It's a reverse kind of racism, right? And I didn't really think that was fair or acceptable, and tried to sort of push through that and treat everybody equally, and ask to be treated equally. But it was tough sometimes.
So you were at the other end of racism where it was you got more positive whatever than you're right, you put on a pedestal because of your skin color.
Or people would assume that I was rich, right? So the other part of it was that people would assume that I could afford certain things, make assumptions about my lifestyle, add cost to things because of the color of my skin. So that was sometimes a little difficult, but still, coming from a place of privilege, that's just something which I had to kind of deal with, right? I mean, relatively, I was financially more secure than a lot of the people I was interacting with. Didn't mean I could afford everything, and that judgment wasn't very nice, but also I had to understand where that was coming from at the same time. And I think you're asking me whether it's the same in the UK, right?
I was asking you whether it's now for example, there it was because you had white skin, you felt the racism was there, but it tended in a different way. You were put on a pedestal. Do you think in UK it is just a question? Is it the other way? Is it negative in terms of if there's brown skin, you think they are a negative thing?
No, actually not at all. I mean, I'm living, so it also depends where you live, right? I mean, I live and work in London. My kids have just gone to school in London schools, extremely diverse schools, extremely diverse workforce. You'll see all ethnicities, all colors, all styles, and it's very much a kind of mishmash, which I think is also really nice and quite refreshing. Outside the city, outside the capital, you might see different kind of skews. And you would certainly see less ethnic diversity the further out you get in some parts of the UK. There are slightly different attitudes in some of those places, but certainly London is extremely mixed. So I don't think anyone looks at me and judges in any way. I mean, I hope not anyway.
No, I mean, yeah, I meant even for the brown skin, that's very normal because London is a because of the city. Yes, I understand because Hamburg is also very cosmopolitan. So I see that there are different ethnicities everywhere. We have literally under the same roof five nationalities coming and going every day in my own place. So yes, I think it also depends a lot on the place where you are.
But my kids and my husband have had a little bit of a challenge. Where I'm from in the UK, for example, it's a very white, as I said earlier, it's a very white kind of area. So they do stand out. And sometimes that standing out has turned a little negative in the years we've been coming. And that's been very difficult for my husband and my kids. I would say it doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it's really not very pleasant.
Yeah, that feeling that you are different, probably.
not just feeling, I think people can also be quite unpleasant. They can call you names and they can use racial offenses and slurs, and that's not very nice.
Oh, okay. So that essentially when one moves from a cosmopolitan city to little beyond, the more further one gets, you're saying that the attitude, of course, is different.
I mean, it can be, because the further you go from culturally diverse cities and the less you see diversity, the more homogeneous a place is, the more likely people are to call it out, right? I mean, my kids walk down the street here and everyone you see is a different color, literally. I mean, it's like full spectrum of colors, which is really nice, and they're no different from anybody else. When they walk down the street in my hometown, they look different. I mean, even though they're mixed, they look different, right? And that will sometimes, rarely, fortunately, because most people are just a little bit curious, which is fine, but sometimes it'll just spin into a slightly less positive space, which is not nice.
Yes, no, that I understand. So we are talking of diversity in both the places at the workplace and outside. You also said you belong to both places. Is that right? You don't feel more British than Indian or more Indian than British?
I suppose I feel more British than Indian because I spent longer here, right? I mean, I've spent my first 30 years here, and then I spent 20 years going backwards and forwards. So if you were to ask me to choose which one do you feel like most, I would say British, because I think that probably goes deeper. I mean, I was brought up as a British child, right? So everything from 0 to 30 was all about that culture. But equally, I can get on a plane back to Mumbai and feel as much at home as I do here.
There are some people who feel their hearts are in some place and their minds, even though they might be raised in one place longer. It's a different feeling for different people. So, thank you for being with us. And it was actually very interesting to swap experiences and to understand what you felt. And I hope one day you meet Shah Rukh Khan.
I do as well. Let's see.
Thank you and all the best. And all the best for your next innings in life in Britain.
Thank you. It was very nice talking to you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And that, my dear friends, is Heather's very interesting life journey. She calls herself a global citizen because of her level of comfort in calling more than one country home. Her observations of work and family life in different continents, as well as her own personal account of marriage and motherhood, were refreshingly honest and objective, while showing her ability to flow between cultures and take life as an adventure. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.